Chapter 17. That Friday marked the end of our pleasant weather for a month. By evening, the weather turned. The wind shifted from south to northeast, bringing rain followed by sleet and snow. The next day, it was hard to believe there had been 3 weeks of summer. Primroses and crocuses lay hidden beneath wintry drifts. The larks were silent, and the young leaves of early trees were withered and blackened. That day crept in, dreary, cold, and bleak. My master stayed in his room. I took over the deserted parlour, transforming it into a nursery. There I sat, with the whimpering child on my knee, rocking it back and forth, watching it as the relentless snow piled against the uncurtained window. Suddenly the door opened, and someone burst in, breathless and laughing. For a moment, my anger eclipsed my surprise. I assumed it was one of the maids and shouted, "Stop this nonsense! How dare you act so foolishly here? What would Mr. Linton say if he heard you?" "Forgive me," came a familiar voice, "but I know Edgar's asleep, and I just couldn't help myself." With that, the speaker stepped into the light of the fire, breathless and clutching her side. "I ran all the way from Wuthering Heights," she continued, after catching her breath. "Except for the parts where I practically flew. I can't even count how many times I fell. I'm aching all over. Don't worry. I'll explain everything as soon as I can. But please, could you step outside and arrange for the carriage to take me to Gimmerton, and ask a servant to fetch some clothes from my wardrobe?" The unexpected visitor was Mrs. Heathcliff. She was certainly not in a state for laughter. Her hair hung loose over her shoulders, soaked with snow and water. She wore a dress more suited to her youth than her status, a low-cut frock with short sleeves, nothing on her head or neck. The light silk clung to her, drenched, and her feet were barely covered by thin slippers. A deep cut under one ear, kept from bleeding only by the cold, marred her pale face, which was scratched and bruised, her body barely able to stand from exhaustion. You can imagine my initial fright was hardly eased once I had the chance to take in her condition. "My dear young lady," I exclaimed, "I won't move an inch or listen to anything until you've changed out of those clothes and into something dry, and you certainly won't be going to Gimmerton tonight, so there's no need to arrange for the carriage." "Of course I will," she said, "whether walking or riding. I have no issue with dressing properly, and, oh, look how it falls down my neck now. The fire really makes it sting." She insisted I follow her instructions before she'd let me tend to her. Only after the coachman was told to prepare and a maid was set to pack some necessary clothes did she allow me to bind her wound and help her change. "Now, Ellen," she said, once my task was complete and she was settled in a comfortable chair by the hearth, a cup of tea before her, "sit across from me and put poor Catherine's baby away. I can't bear to see it. I don't think I care any less for Catherine because I acted foolishly when I arrived. I've cried, too, bitterly. Yes, more than anyone else has reason to. We parted without making amends, remember, and I won't forgive myself for that. But still, I wasn't about to show sympathy for him. The brute. Oh, hand me the poker. This is the last thing of his I have," she said, slipping the gold ring from her finger and tossing it to the floor. "I'll smash it," she declared, striking it with childish spite. "And then I'll burn it." She picked it up and dropped the abused ring among the coals. "There, he'll just have to buy another if he wants me back." He might even come looking for me just to annoy Edgar. I can't risk staying here and letting that idea take root in his twisted mind. Besides, Edgar hasn't exactly been kind, has he? I refuse to beg for his help or drag him into more trouble. I had no choice but to seek refuge here. If I hadn't known he was away, I would have stopped at the kitchen, washed up, warmed myself, asked you to fetch what I needed, and then left again, anywhere beyond the reach of that cursed living nightmare. Oh, he was in such a rage. If he had caught me. It's a shame Earnshaw isn't strong enough to take him on. I wouldn't have run until I'd seen him nearly destroyed. If Hindley could have managed it. Please, slow down, miss, I interrupted. You'll mess up the handkerchief I've tied around your face and make the cut bleed again. Drink your tea, catch your breath, and stop laughing. Laughter is hardly fitting in this house, and in your state. That's undeniably true, she replied. Listen to that child. It keeps up a constant wail. Send it away from my hearing for an hour. I won't stay much longer. I rang the bell and entrusted it to a servant, then asked her what had driven her to flee Wuthering Heights in such a desperate state, and where she intended to go, since she refused to stay with us. I should have stayed, she replied, to support Edgar and care for the baby, for those reasons, and because the Grange is truly my home. But he wouldn't allow it. Do you think he could stand to see me happy and thriving? Could he endure the thought of our peace without trying to ruin it? Now, I have the grim satisfaction of knowing he despises me so much that it genuinely bothers him to have me nearby. I can see it when I enter the room. His face involuntarily twists with hatred. It's partly because he knows I have every reason to feel the same about him, and partly due to his natural to dislike. It's strong enough that I'm quite sure he wouldn't pursue me across England if I managed a clean escape. So I must leave completely. I've moved past my initial wish for him to kill me. I'd rather he destroy himself. He snuffed out my love entirely. And now I'm at peace. I can still remember how I loved him, and can vaguely imagine still loving him if, no, even if he had adored me, his wicked nature would have shown itself eventually. Catherine had a terribly twisted taste to cherish him so deeply, knowing him as she did. Monster! If only he could be erased from existence and from my memory. Hush, hush. He's still a human being, I replied. Try to be more forgiving. There are men far worse than him. He's no human being, she shot back, and he doesn't deserve my compassion. I gave him my heart, and he crushed it until it was lifeless, then tossed it back to me. People feel with their hearts, Ellen, and since he has destroyed mine, I can't feel anything for him, even if he were to groan until his dying day and weep tears of blood for Catherine. I wouldn't care. No, truly, I wouldn't. Isabella began to cry, but quickly wiped away her tears and continued. You asked what finally drove me to escape? I had to try because I managed to provoke his anger beyond his usual malice. Torturing someone with red-hot pincers demands more composure than simply striking them down. He lost the demonic restraint he prided himself on and turned to murderous violence. I felt a thrill in being able to enrage him. That thrill awakened my instinct for survival, so I broke free. And if I ever fall into his hands again, He can have his revenge. Yesterday, as you know, Mr. Earnshaw was supposed to attend the funeral. He managed to keep himself relatively sober for the occasion, not collapsing into bed in a drunken stupor at 6 and waking up intoxicated by noon. As a result, he rose in a state of deep despair, equally unsuited for church or a dance. Instead, he sat by the fire, consuming gin or brandy by the tumbler. Heathcliff, I shudder even to mention his name, has been absent from the house since last Sunday until today. Whether he's been sustained by angels or by something more sinister, I cannot say. He hasn't shared a meal with us for nearly a week. He returned at dawn, went straight to his room, and locked himself in, as if anyone would desire his company. There he remained, praying like a fervent Methodist, though the deity he beseeched was nothing but dust and ashes, and when he addressed God, it was bizarrely intertwined with memories of his own dark father. After these fervent prayers, which lasted until his voice was hoarse and choked, he would leave again, always heading directly to the Grange. I'm surprised Edgar didn't call for a constable to arrest him. As for me, despite my sorrow over Catherine, I couldn't help but see this period of relief from an oppressive tyranny as a kind of holiday. I regained enough spirit to endure Joseph's endless sermons without tears, and to move about the house with less of the furtive tread of a frightened thief than before. You wouldn't think I'd cry over anything Joseph might say, but he and Hareton are dreadful company. I'd rather sit with Hindley and endure his dreadful talk than be with the little master and his staunch ally, that detestable old man. When Heathcliff is home, I often find myself retreating to the kitchen to join the company there, or else I risk starving in the cold, empty rooms. But when he's away, as he has been this week, I set up a table and chair by the fire in one corner of the house, unconcerned with whatever Mr. Earnshaw might be doing. He doesn't disturb my arrangements. He's quieter now than he used to be, as long as no one provokes him, more withdrawn and sombre, less prone to outbursts. Joseph insists he's a changed man, touched by the Lord and saved as if by fire. I struggle to see evidence of this transformation, but it's not my concern. Last night, I sat in my little corner, absorbed in some old books, until nearly midnight. The thought of going upstairs felt bleak, with the wild snowstorm raging outside, and my mind constantly drifting back to the graveyard and the fresh grave. I hardly dared lift my eyes from the page. So quickly did that sorrowful scene take over my thoughts. Hindley sat across from me, his head resting on his hand, perhaps pondering the same grim subject. He had stopped drinking before reaching a state of senselessness, and hadn't moved or spoken for hours. The only sounds in the house were the wind's mournful howling, shaking the windows now and then, the soft crackle of the coals, and the occasional snip of my snuffers trimming the candle's long wick. Hareton and Joseph were likely fast asleep in their beds. It was profoundly sad, and as I read, I couldn't help but sigh, feeling as though all joy had been stripped from the world, never to return. The oppressive silence was finally broken by the sound of the kitchen latch. Heathcliff had come back from his watch earlier than usual, likely driven home by the sudden storm. The main entrance was locked, and we heard him moving around to enter through another door. I stood up, unable to suppress the emotions that rose to my lips, which prompted my companion, who had been staring at the door, to turn and look at me. "I'll keep him out for 5 minutes," he declared. "You don't mind, do you?" "No, you can keep him out all night for all I care," I replied. "Go ahead, lock the door and bolt it." Earnshaw managed this before Heathcliff reached the front. Then he came over and moved his chair to the other side of my table, leaning over it, searching my eyes for a shared hatred that burned in his own. He looked and felt like an assassin, so he didn't find exactly what he sought, but he saw enough to encourage him to speak. "You and I," he said, "each have a significant score to settle with the man out there. If neither of us were cowards, we might join forces to settle it. Are you as soft as your brother? Are you willing to endure everything without ever trying to get even?" "I'm tired of enduring this," I said. "I'd welcome a chance to strike back, as long as it doesn't backfire on me. But treachery and violence are double-edged swords. They harm those who wield them more than their targets." "Treachery and violence are fitting payback for the same," Hindley shouted. "Mrs. Heathcliff, I'm not asking you to do anything. Just sit there and stay silent. Tell me, can you? I'm sure you'd enjoy seeing the end of that fiend as much as I would. He'll be the death of you if you don't outsmart him, and he'll be my downfall. Damn that devil! He knocks at the door as if he owns the place already. Promise to keep quiet, and before the clock strikes, it's 3 minutes to 1, you'll be a free woman." He took the tools I mentioned in my letter from his coat and was about to snuff out the candle. But I grabbed it from him and held his arm. "I won't stay silent," I declared. "You can't touch him. Leave the door shut and stay calm." "No. I've made up my mind, and by God, I'm going to see it through," cried the desperate soul. "I'll do you a favour whether you want it or not, and I'll see to Hareton's justice. Don't bother trying to protect me. Catherine is gone. No one alive would miss me or feel disgraced if I ended it all right now, and it's time to finish this." I might as well have tried wrestling a bear or reasoning with a madman. My only option was to rush to a window and warn the intended victim of the danger awaiting him. "You'd better find somewhere else to stay tonight," I shouted, with a hint of triumph. "Mr. Earnshaw plans to shoot you if you keep trying to get in." "You'd better open the door, he shot back, addressing me with a choice insult I won't repeat. "I'm not getting involved," I replied. "Come in and get shot if you like. I've done my part." With that, I closed the window and returned to my spot by the fire, lacking the hypocrisy to pretend any concern for the threat he faced. Earnshaw cursed me passionately, insisting I still loved the villain, and calling me all sorts of names for the cowardice he saw in me. In the quiet recesses of my heart, and my conscience never scolded me. I considered what a relief it would be for him if Heathcliff ended his suffering, and what a relief for me if he sent Heathcliff to his rightful place. As I indulged in these thoughts, the window behind me crashed open with a forceful blow from Heathcliff himself, his dark face glaring in with a withering look. The bars were too close together for his shoulders to fit through, and I smiled, feeling smug in my imagined safety. His hair and clothes were dusted with snow, and his sharp, predatory teeth bared by the cold, and his anger shone in the darkness. "Isabella, let me in, or you'll regret it," he snarled, as Joseph would describe it. "I can't commit murder," I replied. "Mr. Hindley is standing guard with a knife and a loaded pistol." "Let me in through the kitchen door," he insisted. "Hindley will get there before I do," I said. "And what kind of love is yours that can't endure a bit of snow?" We were left undisturbed in our beds as long as the summer moon shone, but the moment winter's chill returns, you seek shelter. Heathcliff, if I were you, I'd lay myself over her grave and die like a loyal dog. The world seems hardly worth living in now, doesn't it? You made it clear to me that Catherine was the very essence of your happiness. I can't fathom how you plan to endure her absence. "Is he there?" my companion shouted, rushing to the opening. "If I can just get my arm out, I'll hit him." "Ellen, you might think me truly wicked, but you don't know everything, so don't judge too quickly. I would never have supported or encouraged an attempt on even his life for anything. Yet, I wished him dead, and thus I was terribly disappointed and terrified by the potential fallout of my taunting words when he lunged at Earnshaw's weapon and tore it from his grasp. The gun went off, and as the knife recoiled, it closed into its owner's wrist. Heathcliff yanked it away with sheer force, slicing the flesh as it came free, and shoved it, still dripping, into his pocket. He then grabbed a stone, smashed the barrier between two windows, and leapt inside. His opponent had collapsed, unconscious from the intense pain and the blood pouring from a ruptured artery or large vein. The brute kicked and stomped on him, slamming his head repeatedly against the stone floor, all while holding me with one hand to stop me from calling Joseph. He showed extraordinary restraint in not finishing him off entirely. But, out of breath, he finally stopped and dragged the seemingly lifeless body onto the bench. There, he ripped off Earnshaw's coat sleeve and crudely bandaged the wound, spitting and cursing as fervently as he had kicked before. Once free, I wasted no time in finding the old servant. As he pieced together the urgency of my rushed story, he hurried downstairs, taking the steps two at a time, breathless. "What are we to do now? What are we to do now?" "Here's what," Heathcliff roared. "Your master's lost his mind. If he lasts another month, I'll have him committed. And how on earth did you manage to lock me out? You toothless old fool. Stop your muttering. I'm not here to nurse him. Clean that mess up and watch your candle. It's practically pure brandy." "So you've been murdering him?" Joseph cried, raising his hands and eyes in horror. "I've never seen anything like this. May the Lord—" Heathcliff shoved him to his knees in the middle of the blood and tossed him a towel. But instead of cleaning, Joseph clasped his hands and began a prayer, its peculiar phrasing making me laugh. I was in such a state of mind that nothing could shock me. I felt as reckless as a criminal at the gallows. "Oh, I forgot about you," the tyrant said. "You can do it. Get down there. And you, plotting with him against me, you snake, that's the kind of work you deserve." He shook me so hard my teeth clattered, then tossed me next to Joseph, who calmly finished his prayers before standing up, declaring he would head straight to the Grange. Mr. Linton was a magistrate, and even if he had 50 wives deceased, he would investigate this matter. Joseph was so determined that Heathcliff found it necessary to force me to recount what had happened, looming over me, seething with malice, as I hesitantly answered his questions. It took considerable effort to convince the old man that Heathcliff wasn't the instigator, especially with my reluctantly given responses. Nonetheless, Mr. Earnshaw soon reassured him that he was still alive. Joseph hurried to administer some spirits, and with their help, his master gradually regained movement and awareness. Heathcliff, knowing his adversary was unaware of what had occurred while he was unconscious, dismissed him as deliriously drunk and said he wouldn't address his appalling behavior further, advising him to go to bed. To my relief, he left us after offering this prudent advice, and Hindley sprawled on the hearthstone. I retreated to my room, amazed at how easily I had escaped. This morning, when I came downstairs, about half an hour before noon, Mr. Earnshaw was sitting by the fire, looking deathly ill. His sinister companion, almost as emaciated and ghostly, leaned against the chimney. Neither seemed inclined to eat, and after waiting until the food had gone cold, I began my meal alone. But nothing stopped me from eating heartily, and I felt a certain satisfaction and superiority as I occasionally glanced at my silent companions, savouring the comfort of a clear conscience. Once I finished, I took the unusual liberty of moving closer to the fire, circling Earnshaw's chair, and kneeling beside him in the corner. Heathcliff didn't look my way, so I studied his features with the confidence one might have when observing a statue. His forehead, which I once considered manly and now see as sinister, was shadowed by a heavy gloom. His basilisk eyes were nearly extinguished by sleeplessness and perhaps tears, for his lashes were wet. His lips, usually curled in a ferocious sneer, were now sealed with an expression of unspeakable sadness. Had it been anyone else, I might have covered my face in the presence of such grief. But in his case, I felt a grim satisfaction. Ignoble as it may be to taunt a fallen enemy, I couldn't resist the chance to deliver a blow. His vulnerability was the only time I could relish the pleasure of repaying wrong with wrong. Fie, miss, I interrupted. One might think you've never opened a Bible in your life. If God afflicts your enemies, surely that should be enough for you. Isn't cruel and arrogant to add to his suffering. In most cases, I'd agree with you, Ellen, she continued. But what torment inflicted on Heathcliff could satisfy me unless I played a part in it. I'd prefer he endured less if it meant I could be the one causing his pain, and he knew it was me. I owe him so much. There's only one way I might forgive him, if I can repay him in kind. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. For every pang he caused me, I want to return the favour, to bring him down to my level. Since he was the first to harm, let him be the first to beg for mercy. And then, well, then, Ellen, I might show some generosity. But it's impossible for me to truly get revenge, and therefore I can't forgive him. Hindley needed some water, so I handed him a glass and asked how he was feeling. Not as bad as I'd like, he replied. But aside from my arm, every part of me feels as if I've been battling a horde of demons. Well, that's no surprise, I remarked. Catherine used to claim she protected you from physical harm. She meant certain people wouldn't dare hurt you for fear of upsetting her. It's a good thing people don't actually rise from their graves. Or she might have witnessed a dreadful scene last night. Aren't you bruised and cut all over your chest and shoulders? I can't say, he replied. But what are you implying? Did he actually strike me while I was down? He trampled on you, kicked you, and slammed you into the ground, I whispered. He was practically salivating to tear into you with his teeth. He's barely half a man, more fiend than anything else. Mr. Earnshaw and I both looked up at the forcible shared enemy, who, lost in his own torment, seemed oblivious to everything around him. The longer he stood there, the more his dark thoughts etched themselves onto his features. Oh, if only God would grant me the strength to strangle him in my final agony. I'd go to hell with joy, groaned the impatient man, struggling to rise but collapsing back in despair, aware of his inability to fight. No, it's enough that he's already killed one of you, I said aloud. Everyone at the Grange knows your sister would still be alive, if not for Mr. Heathcliff. In the end, it's better to be hated by him than loved. When I think of how happy we were, how happy Catherine was before he came, I'm tempted to curse the day. Heathcliff likely grasped more of the truth in my words than the bitterness with which I spoke them. I saw his attention shift as tears fell from his eyes onto the ashes, and he drew breath in choking sighs. I stared directly at him and laughed scornfully. The windows of hell, usually obscured, briefly revealed themselves to me. Yet the demon that typically glared out was so dulled and submerged that I dared to risk another mocking sound. Get up and get out of my sight, the mourner commanded. I assumed those were his words, though his voice was barely discernible. I apologize, I replied, but I loved Catherine too, and her brother needs care, which I will provide for her sake. Now that she's gone, I see her in Hindley. Hindley has her exact eyes. If you hadn't tried to gouge them out and left them bruised and blooded, and her. Get up, you miserable fool, before I crush you, he shouted, moving in a way that prompted me to prepare for flight. But then, I continued, poised to escape. If poor Catherine had trusted you and taken on the absurd, contemptible, degrading title of Mrs. Heathcliff, she would have soon mirrored this fate. She wouldn't have endured your vital behavior in silence. Her loathing and disgust would have been voiced. The back of the settle and Earnshaw's body stood between us, so instead of reaching me, he grabbed a dinner knife from the table and hurled it at my head. It struck just below my ear, cutting off my words. But, pulling it out, I dashed to the door and delivered another retort, hoping it pierced deeper than his weapon. The last I saw of him was a furious lunge, halted by his host's embrace, and both collapsed together on the hearth. As I dashed him through the kitchen, I urged Joseph to hurry to his master. In my haste, I accidentally knocked over Hareton, who was busy hanging a litter of puppies from a chair in the doorway. Feeling as liberated as a soul, freed from purgatory, I bounded, leaped, and flew down the steep road. Abandoning its twists and turns, I shot straight across the moor, tumbling over banks and wading through marshes, hurling myself toward the guiding light of the Grange. I would choose eternal damnation over spending even a single night under the roof of Wuthering Heights again. Isabella stopped speaking and took a sip of tea. Then she stood, asked me to help her with her bonnet and the large shawl I had brought, and ignored my pleas for her to stay a little longer. She stepped onto a chair, kissed the portraits of Edgar and Catherine, gave me a similar farewell, and descended to the carriage, accompanied by Fanny, who barked with joy at being reunited with her mistress. She left, never to return to this area. But she and my master began a regular correspondence once things had calmed down. I believe she settled in the south, near London, where she gave birth to a son a few months after her escape. She named him Linton, and from the start she described him as a frail, irritable child. One day, Mr. Heathcliff encountered me in the village and asked where she was living. I refused to tell him. He mentioned that it was due to a real consequence, only that she should be cautious about visiting her brother. He insisted she must not be with him, even if it meant he had to take care of her himself. Although I withheld any details, he managed to learn from some of the other servants both her whereabouts and the existence of the child. Yet he did not disturb her, perhaps due to his own disdain. He frequently inquired about the child when he saw me, and upon hearing its name, he would smile grimly and remark, "Do they want me to despise it as well?" "I don't think they want you to know anything about it," I replied. "But I'll claim it," he declared. "When I decide to, they can count on that." Fortunately, the child's mother passed away before that moment came, about 13 years after Catherine's death, when Linton was 12, or slightly older. The day after Isabella's unexpected visit, I had no chance to speak with my master. He avoided conversation and was in no state for discussion. When I managed to get his attention, I noticed he was pleased that his sister had left her husband, whom he detested with a fervour that seemed at odds with his gentle nature. His aversion was so profound and acute that he avoided any place where he might encounter or hear about Heathcliff. This grief, combined with his hatred, turned him into a complete recluse. He resigned from his position as magistrate, stopped attending church, avoided the village entirely, and led a life of total seclusion within the confines of his estate, only interrupted by solitary walks on the moors and visits to his wife's grave, mostly in the evening or early morning before others were about. Yet he was too inherently good to remain deeply unhappy for long. He didn't wish for Catherine's spirit to haunt him. Time brought him acceptance and a melancholy that was sweeter than ordinary joy. He cherished her memory with fervent, tender love and held a hopeful belief in a better world where he was certain she had gone. He found solace and affection in earthly ties as well. Initially, he seemed indifferent to the frail successor of the departed, but that indifference melted away as quickly as snow in April, before the little one could even utter a word or take a step. She ruled his heart completely. She was named Catherine, but he never used the full name, just as he had never shortened the first Catherine's name, perhaps because Heathcliff had a habit of doing so. To him, the child was always Cathy, a distinction from her mother, yet a connection to her. His love for her was rooted more in her relation to Catherine than in her being his own child. I often compared him to Hindley Earnshaw and puzzled over why their actions diverged so greatly under similar circumstances. Both had been devoted husbands and were attached to their children. I couldn't understand why they didn't choose the same path, whether for good or ill. But I realized that Hindley, who seemed to have the stronger mind, proved to be the weaker man. When his life hit turmoil, he abandoned his responsibilities, and his household descended into chaos, leaving no hope for recovery. Linton, in contrast, showed the true courage of a loyal and faithful heart. He placed his trust in God, and God provided him comfort. One held onto hope, while the other sank into despair. Each chose their own path and was destined to face the consequences. But you won't want to hear me preach, Mr. Lockwood. You'll make your own judgments about all of this, just as I have. Or at least you'll think you will, which amounts to the same thing. Earnshaw's end was predictable. It came swiftly after his sister's, with barely 6 months separating them. At the Grange, we never received a clear account of his condition leading up to it. All I learned came when I went to help with the funeral arrangements. Mr. Kenneth arrived to deliver the news to my master. "Well, Nellie," he said, riding into the yard one morning, early enough to fill me with an immediate sense of foreboding. "It's our turn to don mourning clothes now. Who do you think has left us this time?" "Who?" I asked, flustered. "Take a guess," he replied, dismounting and hanging his bridle on a hook by the door. "And grab the corner of your apron. I'm sure you'll need it." "Not Mr. Heathcliff, surely?" I exclaimed. "What? Would you shed tears for him?" the doctor replied. "No, Heathcliff's a resilient young man. He looks quite healthy today. I just saw him. He's been putting on weight quickly since he lost his better half." "Then who is it, Mr. Kenneth?" I asked impatiently. "Hindley Earnshaw, your old friend Hindley," he answered, "and my troublesome gossip, though he's been too wild for me for quite some time. There, I said we should draw water. But cheer up. He died true to form, drunk as a lord. Poor fellow, I'm sorry too. It's hard not to miss an old companion, even though he had the worst habits imaginable and has wronged me many times. He's barely 27, it seems. That's your age, too. Who would have thought you were born in the same year?" I must admit, this news struck me harder than Mrs. Linton's death. Old memories clung to my heart. I sat down in the porch and wept as if for a family member, asking Mr. Kenneth to find another servant to introduce him to the master. I couldn't stop myself from wondering, did he get a fair chance? No matter what I did, that thought nagged at me relentlessly. It was so persistently annoying that I decided to ask for permission to go to Wuthering Heights and help with the final rites for the deceased. Mr. Linton was very hesitant to agree, but I argued passionately about the lonely state in which he lay. I insisted that my old master and foster brother had as much claim on my services as Mr. Linton himself. Moreover, I reminded him that young Hareton was his wife's nephew, and in the absence of closer relatives, he should act as his guardian. He needed to investigate how the estate was left and look into his brother-in-law's affairs. Though he was not in a state to handle such matters at the time, he told me to speak with his lawyer, and eventually he allowed me to go. The lawyer had also been Earnshaw's. I stopped by the village and asked him to join me. He shook his head and advised leaving Heathcliff alone, asserting that if the truth were known, Hareton would be found to be little more than a pauper. His father died in debt, he explained. The entire estate is mortgaged, and the only hope for the rightful heir is to somehow win the creditor's favour, so they might be inclined to show him some mercy. When I arrived at the Heights, I explained that I had come to ensure everything was handled properly. Joseph, who seemed genuinely distressed, expressed relief at my presence. Mr. Heathcliff remarked that he didn't see my presence as necessary, but said I could stay and arrange the funeral if I wished. "Properly," he commented. "That fool should be buried at the crossroads, without any ceremony. I left him alone for just 10 minutes yesterday afternoon. And in that time, he locked me out of the house and spent the night drinking himself to death on purpose. We broke in this morning because we heard him snorting like a horse. There he was, sprawled over the bench. Even flaying and scalping wouldn't have woken him. I sent for Kenneth and he came. But by then, the beast had turned to carry on. He was dead, cold and stiff. So you'll agree it was pointless to make a fuss over him?" The old servant confirmed this, but muttered, "I'd rather he'd gone himself for the doctor. I would have taken better care of the master than him, and he wasn't dead when I left. Not at all. I insisted on a respectable funeral. Mr. Heathcliff said I could have my way with that too, but he wanted me to remember that the money for the whole affair was coming out of his pocket." He maintained a hard, indifferent demeanour, showing neither joy nor sorrow. If anything, it hinted at a stony satisfaction from a difficult task completed. I noticed, in fact, a flicker of triumph in his expression. It was just as they were carrying the coffin out of the house. He had the audacity to pose as a mourner, and before following with Hareton, he lifted the unfortunate child onto the table and muttered with a peculiar relish, "Now, my bonny lad, you are mine. And we'll see if one tree won't grow as crooked as another, given the same wind to twist it." The unsuspecting child was delighted by this remark, playing with Heathcliff's whiskers and gently stroking his cheek. But I understood the underlying threat and retorted sharply, "That boy must return with me to Thrushcross Grange, sir. He belongs to you less than anything else in the world." "Does Linton say so?" he asked. "Of course. He's instructed me to take him," I replied. "Well," the rogue said, "we won't debate this now. But I have a mind to try my hand at raising a young one myself. So inform your master that if he attempts to take this one away, I'll replace it with my own. I won't let Hareton go without a fight, but I'll make sure the other comes. Be sure to tell him." This warning was enough to tie our hands. I relayed its essence upon my return, and Edgar Linton, initially indifferent, decided not to pursue the matter further. I doubt he could have done anything effective, even if he had been inclined. The guest had now become the master of Wuthering Heights. He held firm control and demonstrated to the attorney, who, in turn, confirmed to Mr. Linton that Earnshaw had mortgaged every inch of his land to fund his gambling obsession. And Heathcliff was the mortgagee. In this way, Hareton, who should have been the leading gentleman of the area, found himself utterly dependent on his father's relentless adversary. He lived in his own home as if he were a servant, without even the benefit of wages, completely unable to assert his rights due to his isolation and his ignorance of the wrongs done to him.